If you are a serving police officer, you don't address that culture of impunity that exists within the police force. At some point when you retire, that impunity will hunt you down or will hunt your blood. Let me change my judgment of the panels, particularly the NSAS panels that I had the opportunity of defending cases in the Southeast and to some extent in Rivers State, where a young lawyer from my practice represented victims in Port Harcourt. So I wasn't physically in Port Harcourt, but my law firm had some level of representation at the panel in Port Harcourt. My assessment is this. One cannot judge the capacity of these panels until their reports are submitted and made public. I'm aware that the Rivers State panel has already submitted this report to the governor of Rivers State, but the report of the panel itself has not been made public. Anambra State, as 3 days ago, I spoke to the civil society representative, of the panel when I called to inquire about the effect of the November 8 or 9 elections in Anambra State on the activities of the panel. Anambra presents a peculiar case. It highlights the unreadiness of state government and the preparedness of state government in dealing with demands of Nigerian youths. Don't forget that when the panel ended temporarily its sitting in December for the Christmas and New Year break, it did not resume till about April. Effectively 4 months were lost because we had a governor who was not interested in the activities of the panel itself. The panel was sitting without logistics, without accruable budget, for its work. On the basis of pressures that were piled by Nigerian youths on Twitter and on social media, I think some monies were reallocated to the panel, and they began sitting. Don't forget that the NSAS panels across the country are the outcomes of the deliberation of the National Economic Council, one of the constitutional bodies, provided for, one of the bodies provided for by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And don't forget too that when it was announced, some of us raised some practical problems that we thought these panels or state government would confront themselves with. One, we're dealing with men and women of Nigerian police who principally were previous agents and officers of the federal government, accused of committing heinous crimes in sub-national states of our country. The Commissioner of Police, who is the head of the federal police at the level of the state, is not answerable to the governor of the state. So if these panels find officers that are alleged to have committed these crimes complicit in the crimes that Nigerians have accused them of, who will be responsible for the payment of compensations of those Nigerians who allege that their wards, their kids, their brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, have been killed? These questions were not answered in October last year. We were all carried away by the fervor of the struggles of Nigerian youths at that point in time, though quite a considerable number of Nigerian youths insisted that they were not going to the panels to defend their cases and that the federal government should just go ahead and respect their 5 to 5 demands. Some of us insisted that, look, you cannot pose demand on the federal state and not explore the legal framework that has been established for that, for that purpose. Legal framework, bearing in mind the decision of the Supreme Court. I think I've forgotten the name of the authority now, but it's in respect of the Oputa panel, where the activities of the opinion panel was declared illegal on the basis that the federal police and institutions, of course, who were institutions summoned to the Oputa panel were indeed federal institutions. But the question of probe, the question of investigation does not devolve around the powers of the federal government, the responsibility of the state to set up judicial panels. It's on the basis of that judicial panels, were set up. Where are we 6 months after all the panels were supposed to submit their report as of June, July 2021. As we speak, Lagos State is still sitting. We don't even know when the report will be submitted. As we speak, Anambra State, technically is still sitting because it's writing this report. And the elections in Anambra are coming up November 9. And if we understand our country very well, we might end up with a situation in Anambra where a newly elected governor from a different political party entirely will tell you that the panel that was set up previously before the governor came into power is not within the purview of his responsibility. So going forward, I think it is important that the principal official of state, the vice president of the country, who became a public face of federal government response to the EndSARS, should come out and tell Nigerians what this government is doing in respect of the 5 for 5 demands of Nigerian youth. Going to 20th of October, which will be the first year anniversary of the EndSARS protest. What steps is the federal government taking to ensure that compensations are paid to families whose wards were killed? And more importantly too, the government should come out and tell us, because if you look at the panel that sat in Benin, a former police officer, CSP Isaiah Fege or whatever, was summoned before the panel. She never turned up at the panel. In Anambra, where I moved to applications for the summoning of James Nwafor, Anambra Judicial Panel has the highest, civil complaint laid before it, over 320 petitions. In each and every petition submitted before the panel, James Nwafor was complained against. And James Nwafor, as we speak, is hiding in plain sight. He was summoned by the panel. He never appeared before the panel. The police that ought to have executed the order of the panel refused to do that. The excuse they gave was that they didn't know the whereabouts of this man. But we know that the man is in plain sight. Just a few weeks ago, the man was pictured attending a burial ceremony in Abakaliki in Ebonyi State. And I confirmed 2 days ago that James Nwafor is presently the chief security officer of the security team of Chukwuma Soludo gubernatorial campaign in Anambra State. And this is a man whose names have been mentioned in all petitions presently before the judicial panel in Anambra State. So we are talking of the constitutional abrogation of rights of Nigerians. We are talking of Nigerians who were killed, whose bodies we can't see, we have not found. We have families, look, this is a start. I appear before the judicial panels in the southeast. One thing I came away with my legal theme is this. In virtually all the petitions that were handled in judicial panels, and this is stark reality, the petitioners filed petitions, in the names of their missing sons. And in most families, these sons were the only sons. How it happened, I do not know. The 8 petitions I handled in Anambra, for example, I think I handled about 9, The 8 I handled in Anambra, for example, all the petitioners came before the judicial panels on the basis of their disappeared sons. Their only sons. And here you have a man who is walking free in our country, who is being sought for by a competent judicial panel set up in pursuant to the law in Anambra State, refusing to appear before it. I struggle to come to that conclusion because I've not seen the reports of the panel. But we also have to be fair to members of the panel. Don't forget we had all sorts of groups represented in the panel: youth groups, professional groups like MBA, civil society, and in most of the panels, if not all the panels that are attended, they were headed by retired justices of high courts of some of the states that appeared. So we had men and women who gave their all to hear petitions. I remember of a petition that we attended to. I think it was 13th of December 2020. We began the hearing at about 10 minutes past 10 in the morning, and we wrapped up our sitting at some 15 minutes to 7 that day. And if we had men and women who could sit down in very laborious conditions, when I mean laborious conditions, intense heat, lack of facilities to make these sittings of public hearing of comfort, I just have to salute them. They worked within the limit of the facilities provided by the state, and they worked within the limit of the resources that the state mobilized for them. Hopefully, I've been informed even by the secretary of the judicial panel in Anambra State that we should be patient, that they are doing a thorough work, that they heard virtually all the petitions. And this is one interesting thing. 6 months, or I think 4 months after I closed my cases in Anambra, I was called back by the panel to hear a petition that we filed that we are abandoned. We wrote then that we are abandoning it because the family on whose behalf we went through, the way our society works, haven't submitted their petitions. I think there were pressures from all sides, and they called me, told me, look, Oga, we fear for our lives. We can no longer pursue this petition while withdrawing it. I mean, it shows some seriousness that 4 months later, the panel called me on the basis of their record, that they have this petition in their record. They are not aware that they heard it. If I don't mind, they want to put me on phone with the other parties so that I argue my case. I told them that unfortunately, that petition was withdrawn in December. What Nigerian youths came out to achieve last year, have they achieved it, considering what has happened long after 20th of October last year? I told him to look at it and look in the direction of Nigerian Police Trust Fund. The Nigerian Police Trust Fund is a product of the struggles of Nigerian youths. Rather unfortunately, that trust fund that should be responsible for the procurement of high caliber equipment, provisioning of good standard of living environment for Nigerian police is now immersed in corruption. If you read the papers last week, the chairman and some members of the commission on the trust fund were hauled before the ICPC. Over 12 billion naira alleged fraud, 1.8 billion takeoff grant, grew legs, 11 point something billion were awarded to phony contracts. So look, it highlights some of the problems Nigerian youths have raised, particularly on the streets of our country last year. If we look at the environment in which the Nigerian police officer works, if you look at the barracks he lives, there is no way any human being who emerges from that cairn, I call it a cairn, the dog's manger, will not be as murderous as the average Nigerian police officer who draws his pistol or releases live round at the slightest provocation. Nothing concretely has been achieved. At the level of the panels, we saw what happened. We saw what happened in Lagos. We saw what happened in Lagos when the army appeared before it. First, controverted the fact that they were not at the scene of Lekki Toll Gate on that alleged night. And when evidence was produced by my good friend Olumide Fusika, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, we saw how the tables turned against officers of Nigerian Army and how they abandoned the panels and refused to return to it. I have some pity for Nigerians who allege that nobody was killed at the Lekki Toll Gate. If you find young Nigerian men whose limbs have disappeared, who have been amputated, who evidence that have been led before the panel were at the scene in which the shooting took place that evening of 20th October last year. I mean, common sense will tell you that if somebody could have lost his limb, his arm, his leg, the possibility exists that people were killed. For some of us who have active years of experience on the streets, protesting in the streets of our country, we know how murderous Nigerian state is, how murderous Nigerian state have become. We've seen it in Zombi, in Imo State, where the army went into a community, ransacked the place and burned the place to the ground. And we saw it in Odi, in Rivers State a few years ago. We saw it in Azakibiam, in Benue State, early in the early years of the millennium or the new millennium. The point I make is this: evidence exists that young Nigerians were murdered at Lekki and their bodies were removed. We know this is the pattern of operations of men or women of the Nigerian Army and of the kill and go force of the Nigerian police, the mobile police force. So if people are pointing, if people are saying, point us in the direction of the graves of these people who have been killed, we just have to point them in the direction of the pattern of killings of men and women of the Nigerian Army. And don't forget too, there were also young men and women. I can't remember their names now, 2 or 3 or 4 young men and women, 2 from Delta, 1 from somewhere in Igbo land, who were taken back home for burial, who were killed right at Lekki Toll Gate. But I do not think all has been lost. All has been lost. What Nigerian youths have done, and I salute them. I salute them for their courage, the courage of those young men and women who, knowing that the murderous state was going to approach them that evening, at the fall of dark, sat there with courage to defend their 5 for 5. I have nothing but tremendous respect. We have poverty of thinking in respect of policing of our country. We have an elite class that's not interested in modernizing the nation state. When there are threats to the nation state itself, what they do is to raise high fences, high walls around their homes. All they do is to install closed-circuit televisions around their homes, around their offices. They care little about the protection of society itself. Otherwise, if we have a responsible political elite or a responsible nation state, the nation state will be concerned about the security of itself first, and also the security of its citizens. But because the nation state is artificial, it can't breed life as we do. It is the breed of life that we give to it that makes it livable. So if the political elite recognizes the primacy of its place within the nation state, they should be able to pursue some sort of policy reform, larger policy reform across our country that will help secure the nation state. We have civil insurgency in our country. that ought to be dealt with by men and women of Nigerian police force. Who do we pull into the streets of our country? Men and women of Nigerian army. Men and women of Nigerian army are not trained to deal with civil disturbance. They are not trained to deal with civil insurgency. They are only trained to kill and go within a war situation. Bandits are threatening our nation state. What do? We bring men and women of Nigerian police into border communities of our country, into villages where banditry has become a problem. Terrorists are attacking us and all that. What do? We bring men and women of Nigerian police to deal with this problem, and Nigerian army to deal with this problem. Kidnappers are running rampage across our country. What do? We force the army out to deal with this problem. It's because we recognize the fact that we have a useless police force, and of course a useless political elite that's not interested in reforming the state. I remember when I think journalists from AIT interviewed me over the killing of 4 highly trained officers of a SEID. The IRT, Inspector General's Response Team in Taraba State, the guys that were killed by Captain Wadume, and all that. My response was this: if the state cannot bring the force of law to bear on that army captain that ordered the killings of these highly trained police officers, it only shows that the state is complicit in the killing of citizens in our country. And it's as if I was making a forecast. Nothing has come out of that sordid event of 3 or 4 years ago. So we have a Nigerian police force today that is not responding to insurgency, that is not responding to banditry, that is not responding to kidnapping. We've had cases across our country where 7 police officers, including DPO, the DPO of Oiho, somewhere in Edo State, was kidnapped last year in this country. And just this year alone, a major captain in Nigerian, the elite army training unit, the NDA in Kaduna, was kidnapped right inside the precinct of the NDA. So it tells you that we are just so serious about reform of our country. I mean, this whole argument of why do we need, SARS? We really don't need SARS if we have an operational Nigerian police force with directorates charged with the statutory functions given to it by the Police Act. An ordinary trained officer in Nigerian police must be empowered to respond to banditry, to kidnapping, to terrorism, because all of these crimes comes within the forte of his powers as a trained police officer. When you break the police force into special units with no command structure, what you end up having will be rogue police officers, like we've had over the years with SARS. Yes, we've been told that SARS has been scrapped. We know, in truth, we still see men and women with SARS inscription vests all over the place in our country. We still find people posting tweets on Twitter, some on Facebook, how they've been harassed by men and women of SARS. We've been told that internal cleansing is presently taking place within Nigerian police force. It's almost a year now. We've not been told the structure of the new SARS, the remit of the new SARS, how they are going to engage us. I know last week when Gazette, one of these online newspapers, came out with an allegation that a new SARS had been born, the Nigerian police Frank Mba came out with a lengthy statement denying the fact that we don't have a new SARS. What we have is the structure that the police promised they were going to come out with following the reform, following the 545 demands of last year. I follow the activities of Nigerian police. I'm not aware that a proper structure has been set up Yes, it exists at the national level, but we are dealing with sub-state structures across our country, local government, where people interface with police structures. How will the new SARS respond in terms of discipline, in terms of response to the yearnings at the grassroots of our country? If there are cases of misapplication of the law, for example, by a police officer, how will the institutional mechanism within the police force deal with these erring police officers? So these are issues that the President Inspector General of Police has to come out clear, as we are moving towards 20th of October, another anniversary. But the response of the police hasn't been encouraging. More particularly, the very incendiary remarks made by the Commissioner of Police of Lagos State, Kompol Odumosu. We are dealing with the millions of Nigerian youths who want to celebrate the lives, of their mates who were lost last year, who want to pose their demands again. I should have thought that the police should have responded in a different way. I should have thought that 6 months ago the police would have anticipated at, on the first anniversary, something like this. How are we engaging the different sectoral groups within the youth demography? Showing them what they have done. Opening up police cells across our country, asking them, come and inspect. This is what we have done 6 months after the last protest. This is where we are going through by 20th of October. Nothing was done. And what we are seeing is the same braggadocio, the same display of state power, the same display of state instrument of violence. It doesn't work. I think what the police should do is to look at the new police act, see what can be reformed within the Nigerian police. Let the leadership of the Nigerian police and the political leadership of our country, President Buhari, must sign on to the reform agenda. The police appears to be static. Because we have a government that has no reform agenda. Ask yourself, what has Buhari reformed since he came into power? NNPC has turned out worse than it was when it came to power. I know the books were forged a few months ago, and they told us that NNPC had come to some level of profit. Is it the customs? In the early years of this regime, of this government, we used to hear, 7.7 trillion naira has just been returned as revenue by the Nigeria Customs Service and all that. We no longer hear that again in light of the huge borrowings this government is making. Because if you're saying that customs are making these returns, well, the natural question somebody will ask is, if we are making such huge returns on revenue, why are we borrowing? The institutional reform is not there. Buhari should sign up. Well, it's late now in his government. By January next year, his presidency will be a lame dog. We have only 1 year, some few months to go, and all that. But essentially, the Nigerian police should look at itself, sign on to the question of reform, look at intra-institutions within the force itself that can be reformed, engage the National Assembly, engage all sectors of our national lives, engage the organized private sector. Take for example, I know 3 years or 4 years ago, some of the operational vehicles you find, brand new operational vehicles you find with Nigerian police across the length and breadth of our country were donations from the Dangote Foundation. Dangote Foundation. A cue can be taken along. A cue can be taken from that. Engage the private sector. See what can be wrestled from it in terms of operational facilities. And again, too, the Nigerian Police Force Association should put an eye on the Nigerian Police Trust Fund. 3% of taxable profit of companies of our country are going into the Nigerian Police Trust Fund. It's going to be a huge pot of money. That huge pot of money should not be a pool of haste, of thievery for former. Because you see, the practice is this. I will not scream at the present chairman of the Nigerian Police Trust Fund, because at some point when I retire as an IGP, it will get to my turn to be chairman of that trust fund. Look, if we don't arrest the milice our country has found itself, at some point in time, we will become victims of that milice. I was at the National Human Rights Panel. It's the panel that preceded this presidential panel in the Southeast in 2018. A senior former CSP of police from Akwa Ibom appeared before the panel in Port Harcourt. The only son he had in Sika was killed by SARS, by SARS in Port Harcourt. A former serving police officer, a chief superintendent of police, by every indication, one of the superior ranks in Nigerian police. Few years after he left the police, the only son he had was killed by the same force that he worked that he worked for. It's some of the sad ironies of life, and that's what we say. Look, if you are a serving police officer, you don't address that culture of impunity that exists within the police force. At some point when you retire, that impunity will hunt you down or will hunt your blood. And we find examples all over the place. So the police must look within itself, and reform itself. It's on the basis of this that good citizens will be attracted to the Nigerian police force. From what we see, the display, some of these rogue officers, the attitude some of these rogue officers display in the publics of our country show that it's the bad elements of our country that are being recruited in the Nigerian police force. And it also takes me to the question of recruitment. The system in which every Tom, Dick, and Harry politician, every member of the National Assembly has one note or two to be sent to the recruitment agency of Nigerian police force, will not augur well for our country. Let us have a selection process that is built around the framework of merit. Let the best go into the Nigerian police force. As we have had in the past, the force wasn't as bad as it is, some few years ago. This is the force that produced some of the best spooks, intelligence officers in our country, and this is the force that combated armed robbery. Don't forget, as soon as the Civil War ended, we have light and heavy arms in the hands of Nigerians. In 1970, 1971, armed robbery, violent crimes became a problem in our country. Our Nigerian police force dealt with it. We can return back to those golden years, but the incoming years cannot be golden if we don't, put a handle on the Nigerian police force. Like I always say, the face of violence of the nation state is the police. If terrorists, bandits, kidnappers overrun your police, they have effectively overrun the nation state. I'm a product of struggle. I do not believe that at the end of every struggle, whatever you have set out to achieve, demands you have set out to achieve should be achieved. If you achieve 2, for example, out of 10, it sets you up for greater struggles, in future. What the Nigerian youth should do, haven't saluted the courage they displayed last year on the streets of our country. They should look back, sit back, and look inwardly into the youth demography and the structures that were built around the NSAS movement last year, and just ask themselves, why did the movement suffer the heavy casualties that it suffered? Perhaps if the movement was well structured, the public faces of the struggle would have been able to identify the fact that, or establish the fact that the Nigerian state is a murderous state. We've seen examples, 1929 in Aba, when women were, women were killed. About women were killed. 1946-47, the Iva Valley murder of coal miners in Enugu. Into recent history, 1988, the first oil subsidy protest in our country that erupted from Jos. 1989, the anti-SAP. And even 2012, the 12 days of Take Back Nigeria, following the removal of oil subsidy. In 2012, we lost 27 people across Nigeria in a largely peaceful protest across our country. So if we realize the fact that the state is murderous, the pretentious nature of the state makes it appear meek. It is not meek. Whenever you challenge it on the streets, those who rule the state and ruin the state think that you are going for power. We saw what Buhari said, I think it was August, that the NSAS people were just interested in overthrowing his government. No, that's not the way. That's not the way. That's the effect of the point he's making. I've read people, saying that they're hitting the street 20th of October to commemorate the first anniversary of the killings of their friends and all that. Like I always say, commemorating an anniversary shouldn't always be in the streets. The violent face of the state hasn't changed from last year. In fact, the state is still in the mood to kill some more citizens. It behooves leaders of the movement to begin to rethink ways and means they can celebrate and honor the dead. I don't know. It's up to them. It ought not to be in the streets. Wherever these youths are, you should be able to gauge the security situation in your state, in your environment, and decide which is best. One thing, like I said, that Chiwetalu Agu has shown Nigerians, with his symbolic Biafra tricolor dressing, is that you can make a symbolic protest without necessarily protesting. If Nigerian youths on that day, October 1st, agree that on this day, wherever we are, wherever we walk, wherever we find ourselves, on that day, we wear black bands on our wrists. Those who can wear NSAS t-shirt, wear it that day and go about your daily activity. Symbolic celebration and honor of lives that were lost last year may have been made. It shouldn't all be, let's go and occupy. You are occupying the public space that no longer exists. That space that has been seized by the murderous state. Like Fela say, if you enter street, they kill you for nothing. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Thank you.
Thank you.